Today at the New Indian, we have with us Sergey Strokan, a Russian journalist, an expert on geopolitics, and he has also been a prolific writer. Welcome to Reason, the New Indian show where we get to the reason of issues that concern you. Welcome, Strokan.
Thanks for having me, and let us meet this challenge and bring some reason to this sea of dirt and dust and mud in the information space, which we've seen today, and that carnage of mudsliding. So let's fix it somehow and get back to reason. Yeah.
Great, Mr. Strokan. Let me begin this conversation with a very simple question, because I think there has been, as you rightly pointed out, there has been so much misinformation about Ukraine that we are not able to make sense of the overall conflict. What exactly is happening in Ukraine at the moment? Are Russian troops ceding? Are they withdrawing? Are they winning? Or are they losing?
Well, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of misinterpretation over the very basics motivation of what's going on in Ukraine. Even if we talk about terms, there's Russia's official definition of this offensive. It is labeled as Russia's military special operation. And in Russian media, we are avoiding the word war, while in the whole world it is described as war. So you see that's not a question of terms, but this is the question of substance. The basic differences and why Russia is not calling it war, because what we see now, as things stand now, nearly 2 months after the whole thing started, we see battle, we see combat between two armies, but Russian army is not attacking civilian infrastructure. So we are not blowing up bridges, railway stations, key enterprises. We are not shelling Kyiv and other major cities. Of course, you may argue that we can see the pictures of the town of Mariupol with civil buildings demolished, leveled to ground. But this is something different, since Ukrainian army is using civilians as human shield. And in such a situation, there is no other way for Russian army to conduct this offensive. And obviously, civilian casualties are there. No one would deny that. But let me get back to that once again. The whole thing is not fighting against Ukrainian people, Ukrainian economy, Ukrainian infrastructure. This is how President Putin puts this. This is the fight against neo-Nazis, which were mushrooming, which was blowing up in Ukraine during the last 8 years. And one important point is, which I want to stress straight away, is that when we talk about the motivation of the whole thing, we have to understand what was happening 8 years before that. Of course, any military solution is very bad, and we believe that there's no way for military solution in the 21st century, since we have diplomacy, we have political instruments, but the whole thing started on the February 24th, after the more than 8 years of grueling, pointless negotiations, which brought zero effect over finding a peaceful formula of coexistence of the rebellious regions of Donbass with Kyiv. Actually, they were ill-fated Minsk Accords, Minsk agreements, and Ukrainian side was dragging its feet in the negotiations. And but still, Russia made high stake on that, since that was a brainchild of the leaders of France and Germany, who were also calling for a political solution. They were so-called formula of Steinmeier. Steinmeier, you know, that's a president of Germany, which was, you see, envisaging giving autonomy to those regions. However, Ukrainian side was stubborn enough, saying that we don't want any autonomy. This should be unitary state. So somehow it's probably similar to what you have with Kashmir, you see. So, but Indian side was able to find peace formula of coexistence of and integration of Kashmir into India. However, that was not the case with Ukrainian side, which was only shelling, bombing cities of Donbass. And unfortunately, this truth is normally bypassed or ignored by mainstream media, Western media. I'm not sure that even Indian media was circulating stories on that. So all
Absolutely.
in all, the whole thing started only when President Putin realized that diplomacy doesn't work, but something has to be done with these atrocities, with the shelling of the cities, and he realized that there's no option but to start this operation.
Now
As
you
things stand now, yeah, and finally, as things stand now, we are nearly 2 months after the start of the whole operation. Of course, all the world asks, how long will it take? When will it end? I don't have a crystal ball, and I can't tell you when will it end. Well, let me refer to the yesterday's statement of Senator Klimov, who is handling international affairs in Russian Senate. He said that we're not going to hold it for years, that it will end pretty soon, as he said. But again, the enigma is what we mean by pretty soon. No one is able to understand that. All in all, now we are inching to a crucial battle over Donbass, where we have nearly 50,000 of Ukrainian troops who are motivated. Not all of them, of course. Some are laying down their arms now, but nationalists are not allowing them to lay down arms. They say you have to fight tooth and nail. So that would be a fierce battle, which would largely determine the fate of the whole military operation. So let's watch and see what will take place in the upcoming 2-3 weeks. They will be crucial.
You made several points, and I think one of the most crucial points is that Russia was provoked, or Russia was forced to take this military action in Ukraine. Now, if you look at the US media, you look at Western media, they're calling President Putin a war criminal, they're calling him a butcher, a killer, a murderer. And but what you are saying is that there was a humanitarian crisis against people in Donbass region, and there was no attention from the West or the Western media on that particular issue. And that is why when everything failed, negotiations failed. In fact, Germany also tried, and but Ukraine was pulling its feet, along, and wasn't really helping much. And that's what really provoked Russia. Is that right? Can you explain that? Why is there so much discrepancy in points of view in the Western media versus Russian media on this particular issue?
I have to say, with my regret, that of course Western media and Western political leaders are quite persistent in their perception of Ukraine. So as I told you, in the last 8 years, they were keeping a blind eye on the plight of the people of Donbass region. They were ignoring desperate Russia's attempts to send them signals, because you see, the Russian side was telling to German and French partners, please do something with the Ukrainians, please bring them to negotiating table, please make them responsible. Since you have Steinmeier formula, Steinmeier is not a president of Russia, he's a president of Germany. So at least if you are bringing some formula and you make commitment, then you stand by that commitment. But that was not done. And unfortunately, now we see this misinterpretation in Western media and in part of, sorry to say, in Indian media, which is describing Russia's moves. Say, if I talk to popular Indian talk show, which boasts that it conducted investigation in Bucha, which sends its best reporters to there, and when I see journalists standing near a dead body and shouting that Russia committed a crime against humanity, and I am asking esteemed anchorman to please ask simple question to your reporter whether he has seen himself that Russians were killing this person, and he all of a sudden avoids this simple question. Then I think that probably the people who are disseminated such sort of so-called truth are having certain hidden agenda. You understand what I say? Hidden agenda, second thoughts, and they don't want to look for the reason. They don't want to look for truth. So they're looking for that certain of pattern of certain thinking, which is probably shaped up by some other media centers and political centers. So the whole story is, let me be frank with you. I'm not saying that we are happy with what we see there. You see, well, history would decide whether President Putin is right or not. I'm not his spokesman. But if this is a question of crossing red lines, you see, then, and if you say that President Putin has crossed red lines, then if you are not biased, if you are fair and accurate, you have to examine and to make a brainstorming session and to realize how many times the West has crossed red lines, and not only here, but in, say, Belgrade, where NATO was bombing that, you see, in 1991, we are not doing that in Kiev. We are not bombing Kiev. We probably make some targeted airstrikes, but this is totally different what's happening more than two decades ago in Belgrade. You may recall that footage, that video, how they were demolishing demolishing buildings, multi-story buildings. So that's not the case with that. So if we talk about crossing red lines, so I'm not sure that Russia has crossed more if it crossed red line. It was more times than the West has done, and media also. But again, the history would decide who is right, who is wrong. I don't think that we are in a position to say this now.
Now, tell me, from the perspective of people who live in the East, and although part of Russia is in the East, large sections of the world, which includes Africa, India, and even Middle East, we are unable to figure out this animosity, this hostility between the entire, say, Western Bloc and Russia. We thought that after Cold War ended in the disintegration of Soviet Union, everything would come to normal. The long war that had gone on between the West and Soviet Union was over. But we have been seeing that these hostilities have not ended. What is the reason? We don't understand that same kind of people who believe, that they are part of this one civilization, Western civilization, they're fighting amongst each other. What is the reason?
Now we are moving to geopolitics, and I think I can say that Ukraine has found itself between the rock and the hard place. Since the whole controversy and the whole conflict between Russia and the West is not over Ukraine. I think this is some basic fundamental contradiction. First point, of course, is that the whole thing started when we were unable to come to basic terms and conditions over the key security issues. Last December, specifically December 17, Russia's foreign ministry has sent two set of proposals on strategic stability and security to NATO and United States. And we were involved in negotiations which were quite active till the end of February. You won't believe that we've seen a number of visits to Moscow also, and a string of a marathon of diplomatic efforts, including negotiations and including meetings. Russia's officials, NATO officials, we've seen President Macron here, we've seen Chancellor Scholz here in Moscow, We've seen British foreign ministers. So the diplomacy was quite active, and no one could have imagined that it will go that way. So why didn't it fail? The reason was that Russia realized that the proposals I was referring to, which were coined out at December 17, were not taken seriously. And Russian side realized that that's a deadlock, you see. So we were calling for NATO not to expand, and NATO was just bypassing the suggestion. There were also other proposals. I won't say that they were not fully cooperative. They were cooperative to some extent at some not key questions, including Ukraine, because one of the questions was that we wanted Ukraine to have, you see, non-bloc status like, say, Austria has in Europe. So that didn't work. So this is the one thing, the collapse of diplomacy. And the second thing is that the more I think about that, the more I come to the conclusion that this is not about the Ukraine, but this is something about the Western perception of itself. You remember that after Afghanistan, that was a humiliating, not only military defeat, but that's what's sort of a identity crisis for the West. Since President Biden abandoned his allies in NATO, as you remember, when he pulled all of a sudden from Afghanistan, and that came as a major surprise to the allies. And you remember what sort of trauma NATO and European Union faced during the time of President Trump. Then there was a growing rift between them. So all in all, it seems that today they have found a big project which would enable them to have an illusion of unity, illusion of rediscovered alliance. And that's why they badly need Ukraine, because this enables them to coordinate. President Biden is making signals that, look, we have to launch a war of sanctions against Russia. And no one is talking about him, you see, well, about his cognitive, ability. But everybody is talking about him as a chief commander of so-called democratic worlds. They want to be India also part of this war. So they badly need Ukraine, because this enables them to revive almost defunct alliances. Well, let me refer to, you probably remember that a couple of years back, President Macron said that the brain of NATO is dead. That was a scandalous statement which was made in the interview to Economist November 9, 2019. But a couple of weeks back, his foreign minister said that Ukraine enabled us to revive NATO. You see, foreign minister is actually de facto arguing with his president, who is saying that NATO brain is dead. But then this dead brain all of a sudden turns out to be efficient. You see, he's taking decisions how to send more troops to army to Ukraine. So this is something which probably would give new steam to the whole perception and concept of that transatlantic alliance. So this is not the whole case about Ukraine. This is something more deep-seated and fundamental.
Mr. Strokan, you yourself are from Ukraine, and our audience today who are listening in and who will be watching this show would wonder that somebody from Ukraine is taking a very pro-Moscow line. You are based in Moscow. I want you to explain to our audience that what is the relationship, or what has been the historic relationship between Ukraine and Russia? And how is it that a Ukrainian sitting in Moscow is taking a very pro-Russia line?
I don't think it's a pro-Russian line. You see, I don't think that experts has to take some pro against someone. Experts, they give diagnosis. They have to analyze the truth. You see, actually, you raised a very important question, which every person who is involved in writing and analysis is facing. Are you patriot or you are professional? You see, because one time, if you patriot, you have to defend, you see, your own country or your own people, and then you have to kill professional in you. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. I think that once we appear on TV, once we write stories, we talk to audience in somewhere in universities, we have to be professionals. We have to be unbiased. We have to be fair. Yes, of course. That for me, this is since I'm a patriot, also of Russia, but Ukraine also. Since this is my motherland. So for me, this is also a personal challenge, since I have to conduct a sort of a delicate balancing act in the whole story, and not to end to be as a professional, but at the same time remain a patriot. Well, I communicate with my relatives. My mother lives there. They're not very happy they're extremely unhappy with what's going on. Sometimes they call me and ask me why I talk such things like I'm talking now, why I don't condemn this military operation, which they describe as war. Well, I say, let the dust settle. You see, we are still relatives. You see, and let the dust settle. Let us wait for the end. Hope it will come soon. And then when you see Russian TV and you'll see those truths you are deprived of now, probably you'll have different perception of that. But now they believe that this is war because their brains are brainwashed by Ukrainian propaganda. They believe that this is the war, and they don't have access to Russian TV. And there's no way for me to change their perception now. So the time has to change, and they have to get access to alternative source of information, as I told you, which they don't have now. In terms of Ukraine, you see, now you're talking about the war between Russia and Ukraine, but I think it would be more appropriate to talk about the war inside Ukraine, which started 8 years ago. Since Ukraine as a state, you see, it was born with a sort of initial trauma, since in Ukraine we have two Ukraines. One is neo-Soviet Ukraine and another is anti-Soviet Ukraine. I was raised and born up in central Ukraine, which was more neo-Soviet Ukraine. My grandfather was officer in Russian army, which came to Berlin, which was storming Berlin. And I remember he was a decorated war hero. But those people from the Western Ukraine who were fighting against a Russian army, of course, they see this totally different in a different way. Their movement was winding up, say, about 10 years after the end of the Second World War. And it seemed that it has died. But nearly 70 years after the end of the war, what we see now is an attempt of historical revenge of that anti-Soviet nationalist, neo-Nazist Ukraine against the neo-Soviet Ukraine. And during the last 8 years, they were demolishing monuments to the war veterans. They were beating them, intimidating them. They were renaming streets. Not to have any signs of that Soviet Ukraine as a part of the Soviet Union, participating in the in the Great Patriotic War, in the Second World War, and Ukrainian great contribution to the victory over Nazism. So all in all, we realize that Ukraine is dramatically turning into neo-Nazi state in the very heartland of Europe. And that's why when President Putin started the whole thing, he said that the one of the key object of the operation is denazifying Ukraine.
Okay, you made a very pertinent point about the illusion of unity, between the US and Europe. I want to understand, what do you mean by illusion of unity? Is Europe not today standing shoulder to shoulder with the US? aren't the NATO countries together against Russia over Ukraine? Is there no unity? Are you saying there is an illusion of unity? There is not really unity.
No. Let me put it once again. If we look into the relationship between Europe and the United States in the recent years, that was a relationship of uneasy bedfellows. You remember what sort of trauma President Donald Trump's presidency was for European Union and for NATO. You remember how President Trump was scolding Chancellor Merkel, how he was squeezing the neck of the European allies and in NATO, saying you have to pay more. Why we have to pay for your security? And you remember the grim face of European leaders who were saying, "Oh, privately, how we are going to get rid of Trump?" That's an open secret. Then again, what happened in Afghanistan? Were NATO leaders happy, European leaders happy, when Joe Biden has withdrawn from Afghanistan and killed more than 20-year-old project of making Afghanistan a sort of a democratic window? So there were a lot of, to say the least, the uneasy moments in the relationship between the European Union and United States. And as early as this February, President Macron was making signals saying that we have to reinvent European Union unity, and we are not a poodle, we are not a puppet of the United States. So you see, European Union was facing identity crisis. That's a separate issue, but still the whole idea of the pan-European home was put under question. But what President Biden was able to do, no one can deny, is that as things stand now, he was able to consolidate, so to say, collective West. And now we see enormous unity.
Is Russia not part of the Western civilization?
The thing is that now we are witnessing sort of a dramatic shift and turnaround in Russian politics. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the whole concept of Russia's foreign and security policy was built on the perception that we have to build equal strategic partnership with the West. And that was what Gorbachev saying, that was Yeltsin saying, and President Putin actually till this February, was struggling to keep this partnership afloat. And this is the reason why Russia has formulated that proposals for key strategic partnership, as I told you. Well, as things stand now, if you ask me whether we would be still partners with the West, that's a $1 million question. Well, our foreign minister still says our so-called Western partners, you see, our so-called partners. But the diplomatic war with the West is in full swing. So they are, proclaiming in persona non grata our diplomats. We are doing the same thing already. Some of, I think that was a deputy foreign minister, Sergey Ryabkov, or someone else, you have to check, who said that we are not ruling out even breaking diplomatic relations with the United States. So we have unprecedented diplomatic and security crisis in the relations with the West. That's why I don't know how long will it take us to get back to at least, controlled conflict, you see. So because I don't think that we would be able to come to that partnership, which we witnessed in the last decades. But still, Russia and the United States are as major nuclear arsenal countries. They bear shared responsibility for the world. And of course, we need US-Russian talks dialogue on strategic stability and security. But again, as things stand now, we are in weeks of madness and this war of sanctions. And if this goes on, I won't rule out even breaking relations with Western countries. I don't know how far it will bring all of us. That's why it's very important to end this carnage, you see, diplomatic carnage, and to come to reason, as your program says, to come to reason and to common sense, and to understand that we can't afford ourselves such diplomatic wars, such not only mud wrestling, but arms wrestling also. And again, to stick to some basic things which we omitted in this Ukrainian crisis.
Ask you the final question. Has Russia now come closer to China because of the Ukrainian crisis?
Yes, of course. But we have to understand that this is not something about some Russia-China alliance. I understand that we are talking to Indian audience, and Indian audience obviously would see a certain perception in that, and certain probably challenges to India's security as such. But I said many times, and I keep on saying, that Russia's pivot to Asia, since we have pivot to Asia, should not be one-legged, Chinese-legged. Obviously, we need a second Indian leg, and we already have this leg, and I hope it would be as strong as Chinese leg. We are looking for alternative partners, for alternative markets, for those who would be able not to abandon us, who would be able to understand our logic. I am not saying that they have to subscribe for our logic. You see, we are not saying that you say what Russia says, but at least you keep distance. You use your brains. You see, don't look like President Biden, you see, or Macron, who are not looking for reason. Don't take sides. And if you're talking about crossing red lines, you think of how many times who crossed red lines, yeah? And probably you will find some new discoveries for yourself. But talking about this pivot to Asia, now we are talking about China, about India, about Iran, about other countries. I personally don't think that we can build the foreign policy only on the relationship with Indo-Pacific nations. But believe me, as things stand now, the degree of anti-Western sentiments is so strong here, you know. If you appear on TV and if you at least say something about the negotiations between Russia and the United States, I was referring to the experts and anchormen would attack you as if I was conducting these negotiations, you see. So what they say now, sometimes we can hear crazy things here, and I would be frank with you, that we should not deal with the West at all. Which is totally crazy, as even North Korean leader is trying to find the way to negotiate with the United States. Venezuelan leader, Iranian leaders, all the world wants to have relations with the United States, and India is a very good example. But here we are in paranoia here also. You see, paranoia, I am not talking about the leadership, but about the public opinion, about media, about part of MPs. That's also another challenge, since there are growing nationalist anti-Western sentiments, and something has to be handled with it has to be handled in some way, because otherwise we would find ourselves in a sort of a besieged citadel. And you're absolutely right. There will be no other option than to talk to Chinese and, of course, to Indians.
Well, on that fascinating note, we must call it a day today. Thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Strokan.
Thanks for having me. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.